Oh, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Canyon City Planning Commission, Wednesday, March 28th, 2017. I now call this meeting to order. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Denise, will you please call roll?
Good evening, certainly. Chairman Maloney,
Here?
Commissioner Sherrod,
Here.
Commissioner Clark,
Here.
Commissioner Smith,
Here.
Commissioner Harmon,
Here.
Commissioner Ledoux.
Here. Thank you. Is that everybody? That's everybody.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so now I'm going to ask for approval of the minutes from the February 28th, 2018 regular meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes of February 28th, 2018.
And I'll second that motion.
Okay, before I call roll, any corrections or any? No? Okay, Denise, please call roll.
Certainly. Commissioner Harmon,
Aye.
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Chairman Maloney,
Aye.
Commissioner Sherrod,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Ledoux.
Aye. Okay, approved. Moving right along, we have a public hearing, item number 3 on the agenda. Repeal of Ordinance 19, Series of 1990, restricting 1145 Ohio Avenue to medical office use only. I'm going to open the public hearing at this time. The provisions of the City Municipal Code, and in particular Title 17 thereof, the subdivision regulations, and the comprehensive plan of the City of Canyon City are incorporated into record of the hearing as if set forth verbatim. We'll start with a staff report.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. This evening we are here to consider the city-initiated request to repeal Ordinance 19, Series of 1990, concerning the property at 1145 Ohio Avenue, and replace it with an ordinance which modifies Section 17.24.050 of the city's zoning code to permit a different use under the C General Commercial zoning at this location. The subject property is located at the northwest corner of Yale Place and Ohio Avenue. It is addressed as 1145 Ohio Avenue, and the parcel consists of lots 7 and 8 and a portion of Lot 6, Fair Park Subdivision Section 3, which was originally platted in 1970. Together, all 3 parcels comprise approximately 31,925 square feet. Based upon the zoning that was in place at the time, it was anticipated the properties would develop for residential use. Residential development, however, did not occur at this location. The 3 separate lots were essentially merged, and the property developed in the mid-1970s as a 1-story, 7,600 square foot office building. This building is still on site with very few exterior modifications since it was originally constructed. In 1990, the discrepancy between the zoning and the property's actual use, was rectified with the adoption of Ordinance 19. This ordinance rezoned the property to C General Commercial. However, it specifically limited the range of eligible commercial uses to medical office. The restriction has remained in place as the building has functioned as a satellite medical office building to St. Thomas More Hospital. Why this restrictive form of commercial was enacted becomes clear when surrounding zoning and uses are considered. This neighborhood is predominantly residential. Low-density residential exists to the west in R1 form. R3, or high-density residential, exists on 3 sides to the north, south, and east, and the subject property is surrounded by high density. And then R2, a medium-density residential portion of property, exists slightly to the north of the site. And upon walking around the subject property, the proximity of the surrounding residential makes it clear that allowing the full range of commercial uses that are permitted under C General Commercial zoning would be inappropriate at this location. C General Commercial includes such uses as gas station convenience stores and fast food restaurants with drive-thrus, which would be inappropriate. Property was recently acquired by the City of Canyon City. The medical office use which had been there has relocated to the newly completed medical office building located on the St. Thomas More Hospital campus. The city would like to turn this into a satellite facility for the police department to replace an existing PD facility located on South 9th Street. To permit police facilities at this property is not technically a rezoning. The underlying C commercial zone district would not be changed. However, it will require the adoption of an ordinance repealing Ordinance 19, series of 1990, and amending Section 17.24.050 of the zoning code to permit city, county, state, and federal facilities, uses, and buildings, which is listed as an itemized permitted use under C commercial zoning. The use of this facility as a police department is not anticipated to create greater volumes of traffic than those which were generated by a medical office use. In a May 2017 traffic study, the city's engineering department counted an average daily trip count on Yale Place in the vicinity of this site as 1,529 vehicles per day, which is considered quite low. Engineering believes that operating this site as a police facility is likely to generate traffic volumes similar to those observed at the current South 9th Street facility, which would represent the same volume or less traffic generated by the historic medical office use at this location. Finally, it should be noted that there are characteristics of the site that were described in your staff report that would determine how the police would use it. And to answer that, Police Chief Derek Harvey is present this evening to speak to some of those issues. Staff believes that the surrounding residential uses in this neighborhood are an important consideration in the determination of what sort of commercial should be permitted at this location. There are many uses permitted within the C commercial district which would simply not be appropriate here. Section 17.12.130A10 permits city, county, state, and federal facilities, uses, and buildings within C commercial. A draft ordinance has been included with this staff report which applies this use to this specific property under the section of the zoning code described as property subject to special restrictions. That is the 17.24.050 citation. Finally, it should be noted that as of today, March 28th, staff has received only 2 responses to public noticing for this hearing. The owners of the properties at 1125 Bar Avenue and 1130 Bar Avenue contacted staff about this rezoning. The owner of 1125 Bar Avenue opposed the use of the property for a police facility, while the owner of the property at 1130 Bar Avenue is in favor of the zone change. And with that, staff recommends the Planning Commission, following a public hearing on this request, cite the 3 findings of fact in the staff report as to confirm the city's jurisdiction to make a determination concerning this land use request. Staff also recommends that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council for the City of Canyon City approve the draft ordinance to amend Section 17.24.050 of the zoning code to permit city, county, state, and federal facilities, uses, and buildings at 1145 Ohio Avenue in the City of Canyon City. That would conclude the staff presentation. As always, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Present to speak on behalf of this project is our Police Chief, Derek Harvey.
Thank you, Patrick. Any questions from the commission?
Yes, sir, I have a question.
Commissioner Clark.
One of the parts in this packet that you provided was the parking availability. I frequent that intersection quite a bit on Yale and Ohio, and one of the options you guys were looking at was a diagonal parking on Ohio.
You are correct. That is one of several different options that are being considered. I would point out that we're not at the stage where we are redesigning the site to determine how we can accommodate additional parking. That's still a future decision that's coming at us, assuming that the zoning gets put in place. But we haven't made a final determination about that yet. We do acknowledge that parking may become an issue at particular times of the year when particular events are happening. I think Chief Harvey can probably speak to that a little better.
Good
Welcome,
evening.
Chief Harvey. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners on the Planning Commission, so this project is essentially designed to help our department address some training issues as well as some evidentiary needs, which I think is actually listed in staff's memo to you. But specifically on the parking aspect, the reason why we didn't make a specific recommendation with that is that the architectural design to see what training this facility will actually be able to accommodate, and then how many folks would be able to actually attend that training isn't yet known. And so whatever parking that we're proposing in this particular situation is only going to be what that building can currently handle. So in essence, if we have a training facility that was this size, and parking would only accommodate 30 parking places, then we would limit the training facility to whatever the parking would allow. Part of the exploratory piece of the parking is that if there is potentially parking available on the street, what that would potentially look like. And I don't think we have an answer on that yet.
Okay, like I said, I frequent that intersection. One of the concerns I had viewing it and reviewing the packet was that's an average size street. It's not as wide as Yale. That's a large, heavily trafficked street at lunchtime, before school and after school. It's like a third outlet to Yale Avenue. People go up Ohio and then meet 9th Street from there. And I was concerned about the diagonal parking vehicles sticking out in the street. I don't know that you'd get 2 cars past that at that point.
Yeah, and I think that's actually what we talked about. The diagonal parking was actually suggested by one of the architects that came to actually look at the building, and suggested that as a potential alternative to increase the amount of parking spaces available, but I don't know that we've actually entertained that. When Mr. Mulready and I spoke about that, it seemed like that street particularly would be potentially conducive for parallel parking, but not necessarily diagonal parking.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of staff or the applicant?
Yes. I have a question.
Yes.
I guess for the training activities, how often would those be anticipated? Like once a quarter, twice a month? I mean, what frequency are we actually talking about?
So the training will actually incorporate not only Canyon City Police Department, but also regional law enforcement agencies. So it's hard to answer that question specifically. So let me break it down by who's going to use it. So as Canyon City Police Department uses it, from a training site, every other Wednesday, potentially, we could have 10 officers there actually studying some sort of lesson of instruction. That would be the most widely used piece for training for this building. A regional training course would be potentially once every other month or so, depending upon funding available from Post. We would like to expand that clearly, but because there is an economic impact that's associated with bringing officers in from external communities to be within our community for multi-day training, and all of that encompasses. But typically, I would say once or twice a month, training would occur from a training perspective, but not all of that would be regional. And typically, when the police department trains, it's about 10 to 12 officers.
Yes, sir, I have a question for you, Chief. One of the concerns from the public is the potential for escaped prisoners. To allay their fears, it says that the facility is not going to be used for municipal jail, which is obvious, but you will be interviewing suspects and/or criminals. What would be the security procedures? Because down in the positions, you note you may have 4 to 5 patrol officers as far as on the property, 6 investigators, and so on and so on. So as far as security reasons, how would we make sure that these people do not escape, just as we had an incident recently in Canyon City?
So there's a definable difference, obviously, between a long-term incarceration facility, a temporary custody facility like a jail, and what this facility would be intended to be used for. So a police facility, the only housing of any potential prisoners there would be from a temporary perspective of conducting an interview, say, for a couple hours. So as that occurs, the officer is present with them. And so the security protocols are essentially that an individual, because it is a restricted access facility, you're not allowed to just wander around that building. So if somebody were to be brought in for an interview, not a housing situation, then an officer would be with them all the time, or they would be under constant surveillance. We're not going to have locking doors or mechanisms where we would actually store someone, for lack of a better description. And that's where some of these escapes take place, is that when an individual is housed, either awaiting trial or for long-term incarcerations, then the opportunities for escapes arise. That's not going to be the case here, because we're not going to be booking or processing prisoners here like you would at a jail. It's going to be an officer has accompanied somebody there for the purposes of an interview.
All right, thank you, sir.
For a satellite facility like this, do you kind of determine where you're going to interview based on the crime committed or anything like that? Just as far as if it's a violent crime, take them down to the police station instead of a satellite facility or anything like that? Any guidelines on that?
No, there's really not. We do triage, and if the person is combative, that would change. We might not do an interview at that point. We might take them straight to a jail and house them in a correctional setting, as opposed to an office space where interview rooms are capable. The type of crime really is mitigated by how many officers are present. So let's, worst case situation, we have somebody who has committed a murder. In that situation, both from an officer safety standpoint as well as a control of that individual, we would have multiple officers who are actually present there. So in addition to typically having 2 detectives actually conduct that interview, we would also have a uniformed officer present in case that individual decided that they wanted to become confrontational or aggressive. So it's not triaged based on the level of offense. It's more triaged based on the behavioral anticipations of that person.
Okay.
Any other questions for the applicant for Chief Harvey? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all for your consideration.
Are there any comments from the audience? Would anyone like to come up and speak? Okay. When you get to the podium, please state your name and address.
My name is Kathy Branham. I live at 1112 Fairview Avenue, Unit C. It's in the Runnymede Townhome Association, which is just north of the high school. I'm on the far east end unit. I may be the only one in that group of homes that received the notice because I am the closest to the Ohio building there. I am a retired dispatcher. I worked at the Canyon City Police Department for about 9.5 years, and I did quit before they went combined. I never, the whole time that I was there, had occasion to know of any escape or leaving of the annex building. Also, they had interviews there at the police department on Justice Center Road. No one ever left the interview rooms to where we in dispatch felt like we were in danger. I'm sure like the chief said, if the person is violent or a threat to an officer, they're not going to take them to a place where they could be a threat to the public, I'm sure, because their officer safety issues are definitely a concern. I feel like it is an advantage to have the training facility there. It gives another whole area of the city access to officers more quickly than if they have to respond, because there will be officers in another location farther into the city than out at Justice Center Road. And I have no problem with officers being located there. I don't see any issues with noise. It gives me more comfort knowing that there might be officers that would be there potentially more often and quicker to respond and to a bigger portion of the city than having to come clear from Justice Center Road. Having been a dispatcher, I know the number of officers on duty at any given time, at least when I retired. And I'm not sure how many are on duty at any given time right now, but I'm just very pro this situation. I would hate to see any of the other commercial entities that would be allowed under the way it is right now, convenience store, gas station, I agree that those definitely are not options for that area. So I agree with this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Before I close this hearing, are there any other comments from the commission, questions for staff or the applicant?
I do have one more question for staff.
Yes, sir.
In the proposed ordinance, allowed uses shall be restricted to city, county, state, and federal facilities. Is there a true desire to have county, state, and federal in that?
No, there isn't. That language is there because that is, textbook right out of the way it's expressed in C commercial generally. I don't believe that the city has any particular interest in partnering with the county or the state or the federal government in the operation or administration of that site. But that language is already in the code, and it gives us the ability to, for instance, if we wanted to partner on a seminar with the county sheriff's office, the zoning would then allow for it already.
And then I guess it strikes the medically related professional offices.
That is correct.
Is there a desire for that to actually be stricken?
Well, I mean, that would be ultimately the recommendation that we're presenting to you this evening, because it's no longer necessary. That use is moved, it's vacated from the site, and our desire at this point would be, okay, now that the city owns it, we don't really need it for medical office uses.
But I guess it's a proven use. If the city down the road wants to, sell off or do something else, it seems like it's a current use that the neighborhood agrees with. Is
Would
there-
we,
Why
Are you
reinvent?
saying, would we have to add it back as?
You- it would
Right,
have to be
we do the
added
same
back at that
exercise
point,
down the
yes.
road.
Okay.
Commissioners, I may be able to provide some clarity with that as well. Part of the stipulation for the company that actually owned the building's donation to the city was that it was a restricted use specifically for the police department, not even other functions of the city. So the intended use is going to be strictly restricted for the police department and police department functions. In addition, some of the funding revenues that we're looking at to actually renovate the building and fund this project have use restrictions as well that will have to go before council for approval. But the anticipation is that this building will be in use by the police department for at least 50 years.
Good.
Good.
Is anyone else in the audience here for this topic? Come on up. Please state your name and address.
My name is Kathy Euland. I live at 1131 Bar, which is a townhouse right behind that new fence on the north side. So we are very close to it, and I feel very comfortable with having the police department move there. My one concern was, would it change my property value of my house? But I don't think it will. But that was my only concern. And I think it'll be fine. As long as they don't hit my brand-new fence, I'm fine.
Thank
Should
you,
we
Ms.
write that
Ewan.
in the?
I would assume that they would improve the property a little bit when they move in as well, so that meant that maybe that'll help the neighborhood. Okay, any other discussion before I close this hearing? Yes, ma'am, come on up.
I'm Mildred Dreesen. I live at 1129 Bar, part of the complex that Kathy Euland is in. And my carport, I'll be backing out into your parking lot. I'm trying to be very careful, but I'll appreciate your being there. And also, if, like, my daughter may be working at a nursing home, she'll spend the night, or relatives might be parking there overnight, what permission might there be?
I'm sorry, you said you were on Bar Avenue?
Well, I'm part of that fourplex where Kathy Euland is, 1129 Bar.
Okay, I see that.
My back door is where I go in and out to the carport, and backing out into your parking lot.
That's part of that parking lot? You're saying when you back out of your driveway, that's part of that parking lot? Okay, well, that would certainly have to be addressed. Patrick, do you have any insight on that?
Again, we're not at a position where we can offer design solutions at this point. That this is obviously a known concern, and it is something that we will be working with the architect and the site designers.
Can we assure Ms. Dreesen that she won't lose her access to her garage?
Oh, certainly.
Okay.
Or at least include her in conversations when that comes up, I guess.
I'm very careful now in backing out, never know whether they're coming from the east or the west.
Well, we'll be sure to keep you posted as things progress and make sure that that's not going to become an issue for you. We'll make sure of that,
Thank you.
I'm sure, once we vote. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so I'm gonna, oh, yes, sir? No? No, okay. So I'm gonna close this public hearing. No further discussion? Hearing none. I now call for a motion and a second on the request based upon the findings. And in your packet, there is a proposed motion.
You just want the motion, right, not the findings of fact? Are we doing findings of fact?
Are we approving the findings of fact and then approving the motion?
We would like you to approve the findings of fact and then a motion on the draft ordinance.
Okay, correct. So I now call for a motion based on the findings of fact and a second, please.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion on the findings of fact that the requested modifications to Ordinance 19, Series of 1990, is a City of Canyon City initiated request made necessary by the city's recent acquisition of the property of 1145 Ohio Avenue. Number 2, that the adequate public notice as required by the Canyon City Municipal Code has been provided. And number 3, the Planning Commission has conducted a public hearing on the proposed revisions, providing adequate opportunity to concerned citizens to speak in favor or against the proposed revisions.
Thank you, Commissioner Harmon. Second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Ledoux, second. Denise, please call roll.
Commissioner Harmon?
Aye.
Commissioner Ledoux?
Aye.
Chairman Maloney?
Aye.
Commissioner Shirato?
Aye.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Okay, now we need a motion and a second on the proposed motion, please.
And I will make that motion as well, Mr. Chairman. I
Commissioner
propose that I move that the City of Canyon City Planning Commission recommend that the City Council for the City of Canyon City approve the ordinance to amend Section 17.24.050 of the zoning code to permit city, county, state, and federal facilities, uses, and buildings at 1145 Ohio Avenue in the City of Canyon City.
I'll second.
Commissioner Smith, second. Denise, call roll, please.
Commissioner Harmon?
Aye.
Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Maloney?
Aye.
Commissioner Shirato?
Aye.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Ledoux?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you guys for coming to talk about that subject. Thank you, Chief. Item number 4 on the agenda, public hearing, proposed amendments to section 17.20.029, backyard chickens, and 17.20.114 livestock. I'd like to open the public hearing at this time. The provisions of the City Municipal Code, and in particular Title 17 thereof, the subdivision regulations, and the comprehensive plan of the City of Canyon City are incorporated into the record of the hearing as if set forth verbatim. Can we please have a staff report?
Let me introduce Jolene Inman. She is our code enforcement officer, and she will be presenting this item tonight.
Thank you.
So amendments to Title 17 of the Canyon City Municipal Code with respect to keeping of backyard chickens and livestock. City Council initiated this request with the goal of having these amendments to clarify the city's intent with respect to keeping of non-traditional household pets and to remove certain internal inconsistencies with Title 17, where it addresses the keeping of such animals. Staff noted several inconsistencies with the city's ordinances regulating the keeping of non-traditional household pets. For example, the keeping of backyard chickens is prohibited in the R3 high-density residential zone district, but residents R3 zone district are permitted to keep livestock or hoofed animals. It is important as these regulations apply to the rural living, R1, R1A, R2, R3, and MH1 zone districts, all of which are residential districts. Finally, it was noted that parts of Title 17 had gone many years without an update and did not consider more recent trends in domesticated animals being kept as pets, such as potbelly pigs and rabbits. From RL to R3 residential zone districts, they operate on a sliding scale of density and intensity of use. For this reason, the proximity of other households and the amount of space required to adequately meet the specialized needs of non-traditional household pets becomes an issue the higher the density permitted in the district. The MH2 Mobile Home Subdivision Zone District is primarily focused on creating subdivisions where the internal parcels are individually owned. The zone must be included in any regulations concerning the keeping of animals other than cats and dogs as domesticated pets. Note that the MH1, the Mobile Home Park Zone District, is intended to be a renter occupied, and therefore it more closely resembles the R3 Zone District in character due to density and intensity of use factors. Finally, for animals which have the capacity to grow above a certain weight, there must be a relationship between the number of such species which can be owned and the size of the parcel upon which the animal is being raised. This is not only for the human health standards, but the long-term health of the animal in question. Any proposed amendments to Title 17 must start with separate definitions for livestock and hoofed animals, modified the definition of household pets to include animal species which have become popular since the last time the section was changed, and in doing so, these newly included species need to come with size or gender restrictions in order to avoid creating land use conflicts. The next amendment to section 17.20.029 concerning backyard chickens, we would add ducks in the RL, R1, R1A, R2, and MH2 zone districts. The change must clarify that only 8 hens, no roosters permitted per property, and set a limit for the total number of fowl to 8 unless the property meets allowances specified in the livestock section of Title 17. Finally, the livestock section of Title 17 must begin by eliminating the ability to have livestock in the R3 zone district. This would make the regulations concerning livestock the same as those imposed upon backyard chickens. Given the traditional size of the animal species considered livestock, it sets the limit of the number of species on a lot to 1 for every 15,000 square feet, or approximately 1/3 of an acre. This number can be increased in the rural living zone district, but only as a ratio of 1 animal for every 7,500 square feet, or approximately 1/6 of an acre. Questions?
Where do I begin?
So explain the R3. So currently in R3, and I'm specifically backyard chickens, I'm not talking about livestock. Right now, it's allowed.
It is not allowed.
It's not allowed in R3.
No. Livestock is,
But-
but backyard chickens are not.
Okay.
So you can
I'm going to
have
let someone else answer some questions that maybe has experience in this, and then I'll catch up.
I'm not going to go with the experience comment, but I did have a question concerning guinea hens. Are they included in this hen?
They are not.
They are not. Okay, thank you.
I've, out of all the stuff I've read, I've never spent more time trying to figure out what was what and where it's going. And I ended up with a lot of questions, made me wonder if maybe this is not ready to be voted on or something, needs to go back. But I'm going to lay them out. I'll let you respond, and if you need me to go back and ask a couple, I will. But first, regarding R3, R3 currently allows livestock. If we change that to disallow livestock, how are we going to enforce that? And how does that affect the people that currently have livestock? And let me finish my questions first. So you might want to take some notes. Number two, just on a point of I guess a technicality, adding pot-bellied pigs and rabbits doesn't remove the ambiguity of the rule because you're still stating animals. You're just adding pot-bellied pigs and rabbits to that, but anybody else can still make an interpretation that my marmot is, which is a pretty loud animal, by the way, is customary. You know, I don't necessarily think it's a big issue. It just doesn't resolve the issue. Another thing, you've got some notification in here that if you have chickens and ducks, during the daylight hours, they must be provided access to outside. Ducks fly. You know, do they have to have a roof over there? Are we going to clip the wings? Are we, you know, just questions as a citizen, I guess I would wonder if I were going to have a duck. I'm not going to ask that when we discussed it. Then the single-family homes, I understand not allowing in R3 and MH1, 2?
1.
1. And I really don't have a problem with it, but you do have single-family residences in R3 that could have significant size lots who could, by any other zone, have animals. So I guess, has any thought been given into how to handle that scenario? Because it's probably going to come up. And another little technicality, you keep saying must have, must do this. Where is the verbiage coming from that we must do certain things? We must eliminate, what were some of them? Must be included in any regulation concerning the animal, you know. I guess what is behind the verbiage, behind the wording of all of this? So if you want me to go back and ask some of those again, I will, but I guess you have a good handle on what I'm getting at.
Well,
Fire
as
away.
for the must be and shall be, all that's actually taken from the current code, and it's actually already in there.
Okay,
So that was not added,
was not.
was not. Yeah, there was quite a few questions there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know.
don't remember
I
all of
can-
them.
Well, let's start with the first one was, if you're
you're
currently in
R3.
R3 and we're going to change that, that was
Yeah.
your first question.
Yeah,
How's
I
that going
don't-
to affect them?
I don't see that any different than if we were to change zoning on somebody in an R2 to an R3 or, you know, or R2 to Riverfront or something like that. You're changing a zone and it's going to affect somebody. And if somebody is in R3 and they have animals and now they can't, what are we going to do for enforcement? How are we going to handle that? How are we going to grandfather them in without people, you don't put a sign on their property that says I'm grandfathered in? You know, how are
Well,
we going to handle that?
That's kind of been a big thing with livestock even over on the east side of Canyon. Some of that's R1 and R2, but it was originally, you know, we had livestock over there. So on some of that, if it's been legal to begin with, we just consider it a non-conforming lot until we get complaints. So it's not that we're making certain people who've always had it over there get rid of them. It's only if it becomes an issue to the neighbors. As in, you know, the animals keep getting out, or they've had complaints about the manure, that kind of stuff. So, you know, we're pretty conscious of that over on that side of town, so I don't see how that'd be any different if there was big R3 lots
And if that happens, they need to remove the animals? Is that how it?
If it's a justifiable complaint. With those, we don't just start out, you got to get rid of the animals. We give them options of how to rectify the situation. That's a last resort, is asking them to remove the animals.
Okay.
Well, I have a question in that area, and I don't recall the specific language of the city code, but somewhere in city code it talks about those type of properties that are rezoned. There are certain criteria that will maintain you having animals and certain criteria that will eliminate you from having animals. The only reason I'm aware of that is we had a public hearing and a Board of Adjustments decision based on an appeal to that several years ago. And the language in the code reads to basically the effect, if those animals are taken from that site that are zoned that way for a certain period of time, then that site reverts back to the current code. So they're no longer grandfathered. Is that written into this anywhere?
No, it's not written into this.
Should it be?
I mean, the idea is eventually things will become conforming, that's not conforming. But, I mean, I don't know if it should be or not. I really haven't dealt with a whole lot of R3s that have livestock on it. It's mainly the R1s and the R2s and the RLs that I've dealt with that do have them. The bigger livestock. I mean, not the chickens, of course, but.
Well, my thought process on that was merely, basically to Mr. Harmon's question, how are we going to notify people of that? And if it's not written in a code, it's not written in an ordinance somewhere, we're just kind of basically talking. And then people get confused with that generally. The one thing that we stood pretty firm on when the city made that decision was the fact that it's written in the city code that way, that if the livestock is eliminated from that property for a certain period of time, then that grandfather has gone away.
Right. If I may, so Commissioner Clark
Yes.
and to Commissioner Harmon, I mean, yes, the simple answer to your first question is it's an existing, this is in Title 17. So anything that's changed becomes an existing non-conforming use. So if somebody has a horse and then an ordinance changes and they're not allowed to have that horse, but they have one, they're allowed to keep that horse until they don't have the horse any longer. So it's an existing non-conforming use, just like anything else in Title 17. So, and this particular language that you're referencing, I don't think any of us are familiar with. Obviously, Patrick and I are newer to the city, but that's something that we can look into and have that information as this would go forward to council.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and me personally, I'd recommend that simply because it saved the city a lot of aggravation when that particular issue came up a few years back, that it was actually written into there exactly like that, and the property owner knew what their options were and really didn't have any recourse.
So we do have upstairs in the lobby handouts that we make available to the public to explain things like the keeping of backyard chickens. And what we would probably do is create a similar one for the keeping of livestock, and we would specify that the effective date of the ordinance that's been passed would be whatever that is. And if you had animals on a property that no longer conforms prior to the effective date of the ordinance, you are effectively grandfathered in as legal non-conforming.
Is that an official document, or is that just a handout?
Well, it's a handout, it's an informational supplement, but it's taken from language that would be in the code, generally speaking.
Okay, well, I'm back to my recommendation is you put some type of language in there spelling that out, because it saved the city a lot of aggravation. That was the one thing that the lawyers referred to, the city referred to, and the board referred to, that ordinance is on file, been on file for many, many years, and you're aware of it as a property owner. So it's not just a conversation or a handout.
Yeah, again, Commissioner, you may be referring to just the general blanket language that talks about legal nonconforming uses.
Well, these were code changes based on a particular area where it went from livestock to non-livestock.
So it was very specific to livestock at the time?
It was very specific in that.
Okay, so we'll do some research and see if we can find that ordinance.
I guess that kind of touches on what I'm getting at too, is that the ambiguity, it's just going to I'd hate to create more work for you, for one, and if somebody has a horse and then they can't, and then somebody complains because the horse neighs in the morning, how is there anything laid out that determines what's a legitimate complaint and what's not a legitimate complaint? Or is it going to become more of the same old story of Canyon City says one thing, does another thing, and really hurts its own reputation by trying to do something good, if you know what I mean? And I hate to add another 10 pages to a document to cover something like that, but it just seems, once you get into people's livestock, it just seems like a pretty valuable thing. And I just see a lot of issues potentially
Can I just
coming.
interject? Is there any properties that we know of, by changing the language in this, that is going to be affected, is this affecting his property because he's already got horses on there, and we're making these changes, so that's gonna make it so that he doesn't? Is there any property like that we know of that is gonna be affected this way?
No, there's none in the R3 currently that I'm aware of that have livestock that it affect. This
What is-
mainly, it allows people to, more zones, residential zones,
Sure.
to have, the ducks and the chickens. And there's been a lot of citizens that want the potbelly pigs and the rabbits in town already.
So that would help with,
If there's
our
nothing there,
clarification
yeah.
to know that right
Well,
away,
but-
right off the bat, we're not gonna be hit with people saying, wait a minute. What's
Right.
going on? I can't have a horse now?
I guess looking at the zone map, the lot behind the Oddfellows home and the lot west of the fire station are R3. And there are probably cows sitting on those lots as we speak. Those are large,
Over by the radio station?
no.
Carroll Ellen and the fire
No,
station
they're
on 15th.
South of Central,
Yeah,
just east of 15th
Yeah,
and west
yeah.
of 15th.
those are all winter grazing lots.
Right. So,
They,
I mean-
they do that in the wintertime. I know majority of the time, that's where they grow alfalfa. And so, if it's just temporary, just there for winter grazing, I haven't had anybody have any complaints about those
Well,
animals
but, and
being there.
I guess that comes back to the question, we're potentially striking R3, why? And if they meet the size requirement, why would we remove R3?
Well, to me, it didn't make sense that we don't allow chickens in R3, but yet we allow livestock. I think it should be across the board, either one way or the other. Why are we gonna allow a horse there, but you can't have a
Well,
chicken?
You don't need 15,000 square feet for a chicken.
Right, but right now, we don't even allow chickens in R3.
Right, and that's, I wouldn't have any issue with chickens in R3.
So
but
I guess
restricting a, livestock or hoofed animal from a 15,000 square foot lot just because it's zoned R3, if we don't have a strong reason, I don't see why we would include R3.
So it sounds like we have two different issues, livestock versus chickens. What's the historical background on this? Why are we,
Yeah,
have you had a lot of complaints? Or have you had to talk to people as far as these issues? Or-
I have. We deal with livestock several times a week. It's mainly the chickens. A lot of folks want them and aren't in the zones where they can, even though their neighbors can. An R1A is right next to an R1.
Are these two separate issues then? Can we deal with livestock and then chickens, or chickens first and then livestock, or does it all have to be combined?
Well, part of it is with the rabbits and the potbelly pigs. Those right now are considered livestock. And we're suggesting changing those over to household pets.
We're trying to make those pets.
Right.
Okay.
So it's better for some that feel those animals are pets.
What
Right.
therapeutic pets? What constitutes a pet? I
Well-
guess a household pet versus a farm pet, I guess, like a goat or a potbelly pig. I've seen some weird stuff, so.
Right. Well, it's what's actually domesticated, and, when we did the potbelly pigs, we decided under 60 pounds. It's about the size of a general dog. There are quite a few people here who've inquired, and even people looking to move to Canyon, that have asked about the potbelly pigs. It seems to be becoming a very popular pet, and that's what they've said. It's my pet, it's just like a dog.
So in Exhibit 1 in your packet, there's a definition of household pets and the proposed amendments to that definition.
It just seems like we're almost limiting household pets to those because we discussed earlier there were other animals that could be considered household pets, therapeutic pets nowadays that aren't listed. And I'm not saying we have to list every one of them because it would take pages of it, but so potbelly pigs and rabbits are now basically considered household pets.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, if there are other specific species that you think should be considered to be in the definition of household pets, then let us know.
Well, that brings up a point that Commissioner Smith brought up that I was going to bring up later, and that was about therapeutic animals, because that's beginning to be very popular, very aggressive in just a litigation aspect for most cities nowadays. Airlines, public places, are we addressing any of that at any point in this, or do we plan to, or?
The way I see it, if it's a certified service animal, that's, it's more of a hands-off. They are allowed to have it. It's just like when you hear about a renter, their landlord says they can't have an animal, but if it's a certified animal, they have to allow them to have that animal there.
So at some point, we're not going to have a limit on service animals? And the reason I brought that up is we recently heard in the news about a lady trying to bring a peacock on the airlines. Now, at some point, that's going to be litigated, whether it's a service animal or not. I'm not here to get into that much, but are we in that realm, or are we thinking about that realm in this ordinance, or?
Well, we really haven't come across that, having exotic animals as service animals. And of course,
What
there's
do we
always,
want? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
there's always a special review use if anything is considered an exotic animal, which, as far as I'm aware, we haven't had any of those even come in a while.
I think we're off the topic a little bit.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
was-
I
Well,
think the
I do
easiest.
want to say, I don't mind to say, what if it was a small pony, I'm just kidding. I don't-
Well, that's been in the news
We have dealt
lately,
with
too.
that also.
So I think the note's taken that we will consider potentially adding language that clarifies service animals, certified service animals.
Okay. Any other questions specific to the changes in the title?
Yeah, I guess
Commissioner Ledoux?
I have one. The 17.20.114, livestock and hoofed animals, paragraph D has three references, one to livestock, two to animals. Does that need to be livestock and hoofed animals for all of those, in addition to the paragraph E, the same deal? Are we really separating livestock and hoofed animals, even though they're in the now livestock and hoofed animals section?
The section, the first section there, 17.08.1 says it's taken livestock out and it just says hoofed animals.
Then, next paragraph, livestock means, and so we have both,
Oh, okay.
Right.
we've
17,
defined
20,
both of
14.
them, but then in this paragraph,
It says both.
Oh,
we're
I
talking
see.
about fences and 25 feet from residence. Seems like we would want that to apply to both livestock and hoofed animals.
Can you repeat what section you're referring to?
17.20.114, paragraph D and E. In total, there's 4 references to either livestock or animals. And the question is, would that need to be livestock and hoofed animals for all of those references?
So I can't answer that. I'll let Jolene read through that, but one suggestion for clarity might be to simply split out and add another subsection to split out very clearly livestock versus hoofed animals.
I guess it seems like everything in D and E would want to apply to both.
I agree on that. On a lot of this section, we didn't change a whole lot of what was already
Well,
here.
and that's right.
And
But
for
with
some
the
reason, it was
definition-
already separated with the hoofed animals and the livestock instead of being one term to begin with. So it would be something we should add to both hoofed animals and livestock.
Good catch.
To get back to one of my other questions, and maybe this one is not one that anybody's really concerned about, but are we going to have an issue with ducks being kept outside during the day that will fly away and go into somebody else's yard, or, I love ducks. I've saved ducks, but it's just one of those, kind of issues that really shouldn't be an issue, but you know how things come up.
Well, we've had issues with a lot of chickens being not free roaming, but people not keeping them adequately secured.
Oh, I
So
agree with
I
keeping
would
the
think
chickens.
that kind of fall under the same thing. You got to be able to keep them enclosed onto your property, you know?
And it's their responsibility to keep them from flying away and.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because you got to protect them from predators, so, I mean, most enclosures already have the top on them anyways.
Then if they keep flying away, it'll probably eliminate the problem.
Probably eliminate the problem entirely, yeah.
Let's go up as dinner.
All right.
In paragraph D, if you just added "and ducks" to the chickens that's in the second sentence, you know,
Yeah, I noticed.
adequately fenced to prevent escape of the chickens
And ducks, I've noticed that too.
Which section are you in?
Seventeen
D.
20.029D.
17.
And then I suppose the fully fenced backyard may be deemed to meet this requirement, may not be applicable to a flying duck, but that's,
Well,
I
we
wouldn't
should
sweat that one.
probably, no, you're right. But we should probably get to maybe the motion here unless there's any more discussion, so that we can maybe amend these findings of fact a little bit with the two suggestions from Commissioner Ledoux. Unless there's any other concerns or questions.
and if this is gonna go forward, I would suggest removing R3 from being stricken from 17.20.114.
Okay, so that's a major change.
Yeah.
Correct.
So we probably need to discuss that. Do the commissioners want to discuss removing R3 from the verbiage?
Was there city council request to have that done by chance?
Not for the R3 zoning.
Not for the
no.
R3? Was there city council request for anything in particular, or just to go over this code?
Well, to go over the code, but also for potbelly pigs.
Potbelly pigs.
That's been a pretty big push.
I think my neighbors are going to have one pretty soon, probably. I've never been chased by a potbelly pig. I've been chased by a lot of dogs around here, but not potbelly pigs.
So the one issue, the two, correcting the sections, adding livestock and hoofed animals, and then adding the section, adding ducks to the verbiage on the chickens fenced in. The other issue is removing the R3 from the conversation, correct? Commissioner Ledoux?
Correct.
Okay, do we want to call for a motion and a second with those three amendments to this?
One other thing, I just wanted to clarify, so like, when we were on household pets, and we talked about doing something with certified service pets, is that something that we want to add in that also? I mean, or is that something we're going to look into?
I almost wonder if a service animal should be its own section.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, absolutely, but
Maybe its own definition.
Commissioner, sorry, this is Catherine Tillers, the city attorney. I'm on the phone. I don't know if you knew that. But if you don't mind, can I step in on the service animal issue for a minute?
Sure.
So the rules regarding service animals are extremely complicated, and they shouldn't be in the city code. It's a case-by-case, a factual evaluation that we'd have to do. So that should my recommendation is that to be left off any ordinance.
good enough for me?
Thank you.
Solves that problem.
Thank you, Great Oz. Maybe I'll ask you on the, Commissioner Ledoux's concern about the R3 and the removing it from the, please explain again what you said earlier.
I guess
So-
the question is, I mean, why would we strike R3 specifically from livestock and hoofed animals, provided they meet the livestock and hoofed animals size requirements? I mean, there's at least two very large zoned R3 parcels that have cows, at least in the wintertime. You know, why, I guess, is the...
Well, I was trying to make it more so things were across the board. I mean, it didn't make sense to me that they can't have chickens, but yet they can have a horse.
Right, and I guess to me, it seems the size requirements of those R3 lots for livestock and hoofed animals, you know, sort of clarifies that difference. And are there, yeah, I guess, are there enough complaints from small lot R3s that can't have chickens that point to the fact that they could have livestock and hoofed animals, but then, of course, they're not going to reference the fact that they need at least 15,000 square feet. I mean, I get the consistency, but it doesn't, you know, given the size requirements, it doesn't seem applicable.
Well, bear in mind, in a lot of cases in R3 zones, what you're ending up with is a significantly higher number of dwelling units per acre count than you would have in any other district. And I think that's been the concern. You could have R3s, an R3 zoned piece of land that's a couple of acres, but if it's got 20 dwelling units on it, that sort of mitigates against the ability to keep hoofed animals, livestock on the property.
Can we add language that just clarifies that the contiguous tract of land, you know, must be open and not have structures? I mean, kind of thing. I mean, I understand you know, you could put a bunch of multiple dwelling units on a large parcel, but that, you know, that removes the open area necessary for a cow or horse. And I guess, you know, specifically those two large lots that get used all the time.
We can explore that. I think the key to doing that is to specify that if it is applicable to an R3 zone, to allow for the keeping of livestock or hooked animals, you have to set, I think, a maximum density that can't be exceeded, and you've got to set a minimum lot size that must be that or greater.
Or we could also explore tying, you know, right now, the size requirements are tied to parcel size. And we could clarify that perhaps per dwelling unit. So minimum X square footage per dwelling unit. In an R3, you could be permitted to have X. So that's something else we could explore.
That make sense?
Yeah, I think that's
I see what you're saying, and I
fine
see the
as it's
future problem as well. But
right, because I think you know, if this were to go forward, you're going to have at least two property owners. You know, when it comes time to run cows next winter, are going to be non-conforming, and they're not going to be happy about it, and legitimately so. Especially when they ask, well, why did this happen? And the answer is, well, because we wanted to be consistent with backyard chickens, but those are, you know, chicken and a cow is, I guess in my mind, fundamentally different.
So, Jolene, what, you mentioned that in some cases, these are temporary grazing. What are the rules about grazing on property? Does it have to be, I mean, are we talking about a totally different thing? Does zoning matter? Or is that a private contractual thing with landowners and doesn't come up here?
Well, we haven't had a whole lot of complaints about the temporary grazing ones. And usually it's in open fields, or it's in more of a wetland area where it'd be hard to even get, you know, tractors and equipment in there. I've seen that today over in a wetland area, and none of the neighbors have complained about it, but it's an R2, but normally the animals aren't there, only in the wintertime. So I haven't had anybody express any concerns about it being a big issue.
I just wondered if we were dealing with two totally different conversations, I guess, if we're dealing with temporary grazing.
Yeah, but I would tend to agree with what Commissioner Ledoux said. Are we creating a problem for ourselves by not addressing it? Because if we're going to address things in this, I would think we would want to address it all and just be basically finished with it for a period of time, rather than just have to keep going back when complaints come up.
Right, right. No,
And that was kind of
that's
my
the whole
impression
day
as well.
is trying to do a whole fresh scrub just because it hasn't been updated in so long. So the idea is just to get, you know, everything like we want it and
So should
try to
we
prevent problems.
table this for a month?
Now, we don't have to table for a month. We
Well,
can
I
have a
don't,
special.
I don't like tabling things, but does this require more discussion, or can the recommendation go to city council that we revise that verbiage on the R3 according to what we've been discussing with the other two recommended amendments to the sections?
I think we've got some notes as to the 3 amendments that Commissioner Ledoux has added. And we can certainly tailor this to address those concerns. I think it's up to the Planning Commission as to whether you want to see this again and see if you agree with it before sending it on to council with a recommendation, or if you're willing to, with those 3 amendments made clear as part of your motion, you would approve it that way, and we would take this on to council with those amendments.
I'm fine sending it to
I'm okay
council with
that.
the amendments.
With the amendments, with the recommended amendments.
Not even a long one.
Okay, so let's do that unless, does anyone else feel that we need to discuss this again at a special meeting or anything like that? Okay.
I can say if we have the recommended amendments to that part, we can motion on that tonight. I don't have an issue with that.
Okay, we'll add those to the proposed motion, okay? Any other discussion? Okay, I'm going to close this public hearing. And now call for a motion and a second on the request based upon the findings, please.
I will make a motion on the findings as stated. I move that the requested modifications to section 17.20.029, 17.20.114, 17.20.102 have been directed by City Council and amended by Commissioner Ledoux.
Should we do the amendments on the
Motion.
the motion?
So the findings of facts aren't going to be affected by that at all?
No, no.
All right.
No.
I'll start over.
Well, you can go to number 2.
I will go to
okay.
number 2.
Start over.
I move that the requested modifications to section 17.20.029, 17.020.114, and 17.20.102 have been directed by council. Number 2, adequate public notice as required by the Canyon City Municipal Code has been provided. And number 3, Planning Commission has conducted a public hearing on the proposed revisions, providing adequate opportunity to concerned citizens to speak in favor or against the proposed revisions.
Okay, do we have a second?
A second.
Commissioner Ledoux, second. Denise, please call roll.
Commissioner Harmon,
Aye.
Commissioner Ledoux,
Aye.
Chairman Maloney,
Aye.
Commissioner Sherrato,
Aye.
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Smith.
Aye.
Okay. Now call for a motion and a second for the recommendation of the proposed motion with the amendments that we've been discussed pertaining to section D and E of 17.2.0114 and 17.2.20.029, section D, and the proposed amendments concerning the R3 as included. Do I have a motion?
I can propose the motion, I think.
Okay, do you remember all that?
I wrote some of it down.
Okay.
I move that the City of Canyon City Planning Commission, with the recommended amendments as discussed, the 3 recommended amendments as discussed, recommend that the City Council for the City of Canyon City approve the ordinance to amend section 17.20.029, 17.20.114, and 17.20.102 as proposed by staff and attached as Exhibit 1 to this staff report.
Do you want to mention the amendments that we?
I didn't write down the amendments. I put with the 3 recommended amendments.
Okay. So it was adding livestock and hooved animals to section D and E of section 17.2.0.114. And is it okay if I just add them?
Sure.
What's his motion?
They will be in the minutes as reflective of what the motion that was on the table was.
Okay, and the other recommended amendment was in section D of 17.2.0.029 concerning fenced animals to include ducks. And then, Mr. Ledoux, you might help me with the third, which is striking R3 from
Yeah, I
the
guess
unallowable.
in 17.20.114, leaving R3 in place in both paragraphs A and B.
Okay, can we tie that all together into one motion? Is that acceptable?
Yes.
Okay, do we have a second?
I second it.
Commissioner Sherrod, second. Denise, please call roll.
Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Sherrod?
Aye.
Chairman Maloney?
Aye.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Harmon?
Aye.
Commissioner Ledoux?
Aye.
Okay, clear as day.
But it's,
Please let us know what city council decides.
They're gonna bring it back to you.
All right, so item number 5, election of, I don't think it's supposed to be election of chairman. I think I'm still here.
It should be vice chair.
Vice
yes,
chair.
sir.
I know, I already had it crossed off. I was just making sure. Were there any nominations for vice chair that anyone has received to date?
I have not received any nominations.
Okay. Are there any, okay, so now I'll open the floor for nominations for vice chair. Would anyone like to either nominate themselves or nominate another commissioner to be vice chairman of the planning commission?
Mr. Chairman, I nominate Commissioner Clark to be vice chairman.
Okay, we have a nomination, Commissioner Clark. Any other nominations?
well, I'd like to nominate Mr. Harmon.
All right, there we go. We got 2 nominations. That's a record.
Arm wrestle?
So now we got to pass out ballots. Oh, any others before I pass these out? Hearing none, we'll cast our votes. Commissioner Clark and Commissioner Harmon are on the ballot. You want me to collect them or pass them down?
Oh, but they both,
Oh, they're right there.
You want to count with me, please? Okay, we have a winner. Congratulations, Commissioner Clark. You are now vice chair. Thank you.
For the record, do you have a tally of the vote?
I do. Do we have to give the tally?
I'd like the record to reflect that.
Sure. Yeah, what's that number? Oh, no, I'll let you. You have them.
Gary Clark, 5. And Rick Harmon, 1.
So Commissioner Clark, by vote of the current board, you will serve as vice chairman for a term expiring July 1st, 2019. Any announcements or anything else we need to discuss tonight?
I would like to make an announcement that next Friday is First Friday, and there's somebody in the room that has an art display, sitting back there smiling.
Where
At
is
Canyon Mortgage, right? Is that where it's going to be? Canyon Signature Mortgage?
Oh, very
Dina's
cool.
got an art display there next week. So go visit, buy stuff.
Well, good to know. I will definitely show up.
Nothing related to planning, but, you know, she's related to planning.
No, that's what announcements are for. Anything else fun going on? No? Okay. Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you all.